This is chapter 4 of my novel in progress, The House at Hill Grove. The first 3 chapters, which you may have already listened to, take place in the present around 2018 and involve a woman who has just lost her husband. Her name is Rachel Thompson. But the book is a layered book, and it takes place in 2 different times. And the chapter 4, the chapter that I'm going to read to you right now, takes place in the early 20th century, probably around 1911, something like that. And it's a story of a man named Isaac Martin. And the connection between the 2 stories is the house that Martin eventually builds. And we'll get to that. And without further introduction or ado, here now is the reading of chapter 4 of The House at Hill Grove. Isaac Martin was a man who knew his times. While the green hills of West Virginia in his day looked to almost everyone else as just green hills, he saw them as warehouses of inestimable treasure. In 1911, when he completed his business degree at the Wharton School in Philadelphia, the forests of West Virginia were still largely virgin timber. There were acres upon acres of white oaks with trunks 20 feet thick, and mountainsides of walnut and cherry and chestnut and towering poplars, enough to provide the civilized world with the finest furniture, enough to build the cities and towns that would grow and flourish in the region for the next 50 years. No one else around had an inkling of the value of these common plants that surrounded them, that were as much a part of the scenery as the clouds and the sky. In fact, standing alone, the forests were only firewood or logs for chinked cabins in the mountains. What Isaac Martin brought to the table was not only his sense of the worth of the resources around him, he brought the wisdom and the will to spin it all into gold. He borrowed money on the names of his United States Senator father and his Wall Street banker brother, and built a series of locks and breaks along the 30 miles of the Walhondy and Pocahontas rivers, so that all the timber in a 3-county area could be felled and floated downstream to the sawmill he built above Walhondy Falls on the beeline of the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad. There was simply no end to his raw material. Landowners to whom the forests were simply impediments to the plow sold to him without negotiating. Labor, consisting of young men who wanted to leave the farms, was plentiful and willing, and the market for his product insatiable. His profits were immediate. He sold to markets in New York and Philadelphia, Columbus and Cincinnati, and found that he could double his prices and not lose a single customer. He expanded his sawmill and tripled production. Still, the stacks of fine logs on his lot grew, and still demand for lumber increased. In 10 years, his debts were all satisfied, and his coffers so full of money from every quarter that he could scarcely count it all. At the age of 35, and at the invitation of an Austrian nobleman who had visited his works in West Virginia, William Martin sailed upon the Lusitania from New York to London and traveled by rail to the mountain hometown of Count von Suttner, and there surveyed the forests of Eastern Europe and gave the Count advice for establishing his own lumber mills. The Count was a generous man and more than a little impressed with the energy and ingenuity of this American businessman. And he introduced Isaac Martin to his cousin, Princess Rebecca. Isaac Martin not only knew his times, he knew his own heart and mind, and he knew that there would never be another like this princess. And he stayed in Austria, learning the language and customs, and attending concerts and balls with the nobility, while his business in the New World continued to grow and prosper. So ends chapter 4.